this session will give us some insights on how young people can adequately contribute to shaping policy in MEAs. Innocent, over to you.
Thank you very much, Priska. Indeed, it's my pleasure to join you and I think the hundreds of youths who probably I'm not able to see on the screen right now, but actually it's quite important that even on a Saturday, we see quite a large number of youth who are interested in understanding how they can play their role in the global advocacy processes. So if you allow me, I think a few minutes, I'll just share my screen now. I hope that the screen is visible now. Kindly confirm if that is the case, Priska. I just need a confirmation that you're able to see my screen.
Yes, we can see. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. So you had already done the introduction. I will repeat it just for purposes of trying to put into the context of the work that I do. I've been working with the WWF now for about 7 years in policy processes, mostly advocacy, but also in the development of these policy positions that we use to advocate our positions, both at the national level and now for the last 4.5 years at the global level. And so I bring on board the experiences and perhaps ideas that I've gathered through these experiences, also joined up with other experiences that I gathered while working from the side that you expect to be listening to us from government. And so it's going to be a good mosaic of ideas generated from all these experiences. And while the general approach for my presentation is going to, or rather the expectation is that the general approach should be targeting all the multilateral environment agreements in general. I will focus a little bit more on the CBD process, but also with a lot of nuancing on what is generally the approach to do influencing and advocacy influencing for all multilateral environment agreements. I mean, right now we've got a specific challenge which we are trying to address through the Convention on Biological Diversity, but the approach that we use to try and analyze and prepare ourselves is pretty much shared across any multilateral environment agreement, or indeed a decision-making platform, as will be the case. So just a bit of context on why multilateral environment agreements are important. We've got a number of global challenges that require actions by more than one country. This could be because the problem cannot be solved by the actions of one country alone, or requires actions across regions for it to be effective, perhaps even possible. So these ones include any agreement that are signed between 3 or more states to identify a specific environmental problem. And this could be at the regional or global level. And what is important is that these multilateral environment agreements are important by way of them being the way in which the actions of every party to the agreement is bound or is expected to perform in order to meet the objectives of that particular agreement. We've got many examples. I'll just mention the 3 Rio conventions. That is the Convention on combating the desertification, the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as the Convention on Climate Change, which most of us are already familiar with. But there are many, many others. I think there's a very huge number of multilateral environment agreements that perhaps each one of you may may take some time to learn from. Their publications done by UNEP. There's a whole compendium on multilateral environment agreements, which you could study to understand the whole spectrum of agreements that we've got. But like I mentioned, we should also think about other decision-making platforms, which are not necessarily multilateral environment agreements. In Africa, we've got the Africa Ministerial Conference on Environment, which is quite important. I think there will be regional or sub-regional platforms that also make important decisions related to the environment, either in terms of legislative decisions, like the regional courts, but we've also got the regional economic commissions that also make decisions that are very, very important to the environment, and whose decisions or influences cut across the objectives of other environmental agreements. We've got the United Nations Environment Assembly and the High-Level Political Forum, which address the issues of environment from the different dimensions. The UNEA, for instance, is quite key in advancing the environmental dimension of the HLPF, while the HLPF, or rather of the Sustainable Development Goals, while the HLPF is quite important in making sure that the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals it remains one that is integrating all the three dimensions of sustainable development. That is the environment, social, and economic considerations. So I think that's a good introduction of what these ones are. Now I'll go quickly back to the CVD. And like I mentioned, this CVD process is used as a live example because most of us, if not all of us, are in one way or another already involved in this. But then later on, I will also come back to generic approaches that are applicable across the board. So trying to look at the decision-making process of the CBD, we understand it to be a cyclical process. This is because the end of one COP usually signifies a range of decisions, either as unique decisions that need to be addressed in the intersessional period, or a continuation of discussions on the standing agenda items that are usually handled within the different subsidiary bodies. This cycle repeats again after every meeting of the COP, and it may include additional tasks. For instance, in the COP15, there was that decision 14/34, which also set out a process to agree on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And that then becomes a very, very important area of focus in the period between COP14 and the COP15. So these ones are usually discussed within a range of meetings of the subsidiary bodies. We've got Substar and SBI, which I believe maybe in the introductory phases of this training, you had the opportunity to go through. But specifically for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, we've got an open-ended working group, which is also established as a subsidiary body by the Conference of Parties, and which is the platform through which these negotiations on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework is going to be discussed. So when I talk about decisions here, I do not mean that there's a new agreement per se, but the additional pieces of what we might call soft law to implement the conventions. There are different agenda items that are constantly or rather regularly discussed at the COP, and these subsidiaries bodies prepare the draft decisions, which continuously help with the implementation of the convention. And the decisions are usually in the form of if you know, like for instance, resolutions or other decisions. We've got what is called the preamble, like pretty much like setting the scene, the context behind any decision. But then it has importantly the operative section, which requires or it stipulates the kind of action that is to be undertaken either by member states or by the Secretariat, as the case might be. Important Context, I'm not back to the advocacy tactics, but this is quite important. Context in how the decisions are reached, in that consensus is very important. Actually, it has been the main approach to reaching decisions in the convention. And that includes even the negotiations of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Reaching consensus is not easy, as those of you who have taken part in the various negotiations may attest. And also within the Rule 40 of the convention, the articles of the convention, we've got, not the articles, but the Rule 40 of the convention, we've got a provision which for voting in case the parties are not able to reach consensus. Fortunately for me, because consensus is very important, this is rarely practiced. I think I would even go back and I cannot find any instance where this provision has been invoked. But what that means in practice with regards to reaching consensus is that there are long negotiations over draft texts, and this includes addition of new texts, which is already perhaps within the agreed parameters, but also interestingly, and also as one of the ways to progress the decision making, we've also got instances where we've got new language, terminology, or even ideas coming into the decisions. A good case in mind is just recently we've got language around nature-based solutions, which I would say it falls within the category of what I'm trying to describe. It results into lots of discussions between the different parties, because different parties have got different ways of approaching the introduction of these new texts or ideas, and that is one of the ways in which this happens. It may also include the deleting texts, which has been provided in the draft the draft text. The deletion is an iterative process, because every time that you negotiate, you introduce new text, which either is deleted, and in the end, what is not agreed remains in brackets at the close of the respective sessions. So this is quite a good context on how decisions are reached, and understanding this is important because usually our influence comes in to try and advance our priorities as youth, as NGOs, as observers, and even it's the same case for parties as well, through these draft text that is presented for negotiation. Again, another important consideration. There's some background noise. Perhaps if you're not, if you could kindly mute your mic. If there's a question, you could put it in chat. We could address it later. Yes.
Donc,
okay.
J'entends.
Sorry, Tom, I think it's the interpreter.
Okay, it's coming through my channel, so I will proceed. The other important consideration to make as a background is trying to understand who the participants in the CBD meetings or the negotiations are, and this would apply to any other multilateral environment agreement. Just try to understand who are the players and the roles that they play. So in the CBD, we've got parties who are the ultimate decision makers. Then we've got another category of stakeholders called the observers, and these ones include any other stakeholder that is not a party to the convention. And this includes the non-party countries, or rather member states of the United Nations, like notably the United States, and also the Holy See. We've got also United Nations agencies. They could be programs, specialized agencies, and these ones take part depending on what issues is at hand And so it's not always constant. You will see the WHO, you will see UNEP, you will see the Food and Agriculture Organization making interventions at different points in the negotiation based on the agenda item that's on the table. We've also got other intergovernmental organizations which also take the meetings important, and they also have a place. We've got indigenous peoples, the IPLC group, women, youth, industry, private sector, scientific and technological research and institutions, as well as NGOs, which is perhaps the largest stakeholder group. The importance of observers is usually in that many times the parties could miss out or underestimate certain perspectives which are very, very important. And this doesn't happen because it's deliberate, but it happens because of various reasons. For instance, if you have a variety of the wide variety of the participants, maybe at the parties level being older people, much older people, there are certain important elements that the youth would consider very, very important, but this category, the parties may either miss it out altogether or underestimate. And when you underestimate, you have the tendency of perhaps giving it a less prominent than desirable role within the negotiations. So this is the role that observers do to try and make sure that the common objectives of, for instance, for the CBD is to ensure that we, by 2050, will be living in harmony with nature. But how you get there is all that matters. I mean, like they say, the devil is always in the details. And how you get there includes even intergenerational issues, which the youth can do a very good job at making sure they remain appropriately and prominently highlighted within all the decisions, within all the discussions within the convention. And so this would apply to any other multilateral environment agreement or treaty. And it's important. So I've just highlighted what will be important for the youth. I think each of those the observer group categories have got their roles. Some are experts. So for instance, the UN specialized agencies would have the expertise in the global policy or the very technical expertise on related to certain issues like food, like health, that are very, very important. Looking at the political groupings within the CBD, this is quite important because the CBD is, particularly when you get to the meeting of the COP, the political considerations of the regions are quite important because the decisions are not only technical. Actually, in my own, I would say, non-published observations, I would say that most of the decisions that are made, even if you look at the decisions that you're influencing at country level, I mean, the technical element is almost just 20%, and the rest of it is basically the politics. So it's quite important to understand the politics within any particular decision that you're following within any platform or also any multilateral environment agreements, because a good understanding of this will be a success factor for your for you to become effective in your advocacy. We've got the political groupings of the Latin American, Caribbean countries. We've got the Africa group, which comprises of all the member states of the African continent. We've got the Asia Pacific, Central and Eastern Europe, the Western Europe, and other governments. And then we've also got another formation of JUSCANs, which is also quite an influential one in the CBD, as well as the small island developing states, which again might be spread across the other regions, like you may find them in the GRULAC. You might also find them in Asia Pacific. One thing to note is that political groupings are not always united in their positions. Like so this is important because when you're advocating, particularly within the group, you should have the expectations quite measured in knowing that sometimes you may not be able to get a common agreement on any particular issue. But what is important is to get a good base of understanding on any particular issue that will help to advance the priorities that you've got. And also it's possible for other formations consistent with other political groupings that are out of the CBD to manifest. This includes, for instance, the G77. You might be, I'm just using G77 as an example, because you might actually find, for instance, unity on particular positions within countries from Africa, GRULAC, and even other Asia Pacific countries that are not necessarily that are not falling under the category of either political, any of those political groupings, but under either G77. So there are other influences that come, for instance, in capitals of, in the other global policy capital, let's say Geneva or New York, that also can find its way into the CBD. And these are quite important for you to understand. So that means that you actually need to have your net cast quite wide at the horizon that you look at when you're doing your political analysis. What it means in terms of the influencing of the CBD. So I've talked about the CBD parties as being central to the decision making, and that's why even in my infographic here, it's appearing at the center. But in between it, you also see informal coalitions within parties. Those of you who are at the recently concluded meetings, you will note this, for instance, the coalitions such as the High Ambition Coalition, which are informal, but also playing out within the CBD parties. It's good to have a good understanding of all these, what their priorities are. And so for any issue that you would like to make sure that it is integrated in the decision making of the CBD, as an example. Also, understanding of these coalitions might be quite important because it could present for you either greater understanding of how to ensure you're responsive, you try to reach your objective while being responsive to the political formations, but it could also be an opportunity for you to get greater backing for certain ideas. For instance, if you've got intergenerational issues that you like to be picked up, you can go through the group of coalitions because it's much better than a single country. But you need to understand the grouping very well. The informal coalitions, understand what they stand for, what objectives are, to see whether it's a good fit for your advocacy. So in this, we've got what we call the direct advocacy with the parties. This first one and the most direct means being indirect advocacy contact at capital level. So this means the work that you do with your own party. I mean, all of us come from different countries. So if you come from Kenya, there's a advocacy work that you will do directly with your party focal points or ministries that are responsible for any particular multilateral environment, and also directly during the CBD or other regional meetings in the intersessional period. So that's direct. I'll come back to that later on. But then there's also the direct engagement that you could also pursue to try and reach the parties. And this could be from the point of view of specific sectors, or using auxiliary approaches, such as if you like, for instance, a particular focus on food and how it affects, interacts with the youth priorities. You could actually put together a youth focused webinar on a sector specific issue. It could be infrastructure, it could be youth, and invite parties or other influential players to these webinars or dialogues. And in that case, you can have open discussions and advance your issues, or at least set the agenda for them, so that even when you continue to do advocacy during the CBD meetings itself, these ideas are not new, but they've been already seen by others, adopted by others, and even there's buy-in from a number of parties. And that's how you build the consensus, because the expectation is also not that you will be able to reach your objective just by one touch. I mean, it involves a lot of sustained effort. And also other allies, you can seek you can go through other allies. I think this also relates to other, I would say, formal groupings like, for instance, the G7. I cannot think of a good grouping within the region, because, for instance, if I think about African ministers of environment, all of them gather through the AMSEN, and so we don't have something like the G7 that will maybe have members from here. But then you also know that there are instances when African parties are also invited to some of these meetings. So if you have a good understanding of this, you could also use that as an entry point. So what it means at the global level is that you are able to provide your positions directly to parties through the different platforms, like the submissions that you make to the CBD. And I think that if you have well-organized approach to this, you can also be in a position to send these positions directly to parties, either to all parties, but also what is important is to make sure that the particular position that you have has a backing of an advocacy plan around it. Like, for instance, you understand the constellation of parties that you may want to go to, depending on how you understand their role within that particular issue. Other issues, this could be, for instance, that they understand the issue, or rather they have mentioned a willingness to support a particular issue that you're also pushing for, and so on and so forth. So it's not just that you want to send out these indiscriminately. I think you must have some strategy and method when you are sending out these positions to parties, so that you are able to leverage that understanding to be more efficient, but also more effective in your advocacy. You're also able to provide peer review of CBD documents. We've got plans of action that are always, as an example, provided for the input by parties and other stakeholders. And I know even within the youth groupings, we've got experts who are still youth in particular areas, who could play a very big role in the provision of this peer review. What is important here is coordination, so that you, for instance, approach this from either an African youth perspective, making sure that it feeds onto the greater GBIN youth perspectives. Then in that way, maybe the focus of the peer review could be from either GBIN global, but one that is reflective of all the positions, including your own position. But I think there's all the freedom to provide the peer reviews even directly. But like I said, in all these approaches, the method and strategy is quite important. You're also able to do joint advocacy with others, including other NGOs and also the IPLC, for instance, where issues are common. And it also means that when you're making interventions or even statements during the plenaries, you're able to get a bigger voice. For instance, when you make one statement that is being made on behalf of the NGOs and IPLC, and it's quite a strong signal that you will be sending. So coordination around this will be important. What you could also do is to join the GBIN delegation to a CBD meeting. This is not an unlimited opportunity. Of course, there's issues of space, access, particularly in times of COVID, where the numbers of participants in person are quite restricted. The resource implications on the numbers of participants. So it's a coordination around this is good to make sure that if a GBIN delegation is being formed, there's a good African representation. And this provides you with an opportunity to network and also to engage with your country delegations directly while there, because that will also strengthen the relationship that you've got. You will learn quite a lot. And also you've got an opportunity to also showcase through other opportunities like side events. You may join a party delegation or also be a delegation member of another stakeholder group like IPLC and NGOs. I think I have already seen this happen where youth representatives are also part of the IPLC or NGO delegations. All that is required is prior arrangement. But importantly, when you're in a party delegation, I think it's also good to do an assessment of the returns of that, because there are certain things that if from one party to another, it may be less effective, because less effective to be a party delegation than it will be, let's say, to be just a youth delegation. So an assessment of this is quite important. At the national level, it's very, very important to understand the ground that you're standing on very well, because you must understand your overall government ambition with regards to any particular decision. And you can do this by looking at many approaches. You could, for instance, look at the kind of commitments that your respective government has made globally with respect to the particular multilateral environment, or related to that particular multilateral environment, or to the particular issue that is of priority to you. And the important is to this is to also to leverage what if you know that they've signed up to a certain a commitment at a political high level, and you're seeing a bit of a gap in the negotiation, then you could use that as an opportunity to leverage that high level commitment to the extent possible. But you also need to identify your country priorities, and also assess buy-in from other sectors, and at also the highest level of government. And this includes other ministries that are quite influential or rather important in the implementation of that decision, should it come back to country level. Includes where the resources come from, like the ministries of finance. Understanding of your national context and positions is quite important, because it's based on a number of factors which are all sensible, and you expect that any rational government will not just come to a position based on maybe individual or whimsical basis, but through a very thorough analysis of issues that, or rather the national context, both socioeconomic, mostly socioeconomics. Actually, this is what influences most. I believe that in the session that has just concluded, this was quite clear. And once you've got an understanding of this, then you can actually articulate your youth priorities and your youth recommendations, your asks, in a way that is very responsive to the local context. It's not always that you try to agree with the local context, but you need to be very well connected to the local context, so that whatever you're pushing for is also being seen within the local context. Because this way, you're likely to see a much more realistic position being taken by your party or country, member state, depending on which platform or multilateral environment agreement we are talking about. And then, of course, you also strive to advocate for an ideal outcome, particularly where you see that it's the issue on issues where you may not be very, as youth representatives, you may not be completely aligned with your party, but you try to seek out for the best outcome out of that, so that it's not a complete loss, but you try to make sure that you get the best out of it from a national policy position point of view. This is what it looks like, a number of analysis to conduct. You do your context analysis. You also look at who the actors are within the country level. And you also look at other influencers who could be important. On youth issues, you could pick up an influencer who is very, very influential and able to pick up your issues. Just as an example, if you look at the issues of youth in biodiversity, a good influence will be, for instance, if you do your assessment and you find that, for instance, the first lady of that country has been quite engaged in environmental issues with the focus on the youth, then you've got your entry point there to get them involved, because you know they are very, very influential, and they will get the decision makers at the national level to give it a good attention. And while you're doing this, it's quite important that you set out exactly what targets you have, meaning that there's the best case scenario and what you think will be acceptable in the worst possible scenario. And then the channels of influence, quite important, whether it's going to be in room discussions or outside the room, Mostly inside the room is always the best, because you've got a good opportunity to get a good discussion, very extended and comprehensive discussions, any particular issue, so that by the time an issue that you're picking, that you're advocating for is picked up, it's going to be sustained throughout, because there are many instances where you raise an issue, it's picked up, but there is no sustenance. Like, you find the party is not able to sustain the discussion on that, because the development of that policy position was not organic. And so you have to keep reminding every time, which is not the ideal, because you need your party to be able to fight for that, or rather other parties to continue to fight for your priorities, even in your absence, supposing you are not able to be on the delegation or in the actual negotiations when they're happening. You also have to look at, of course, your role within the country. Your role, and here I use GBIN, but I know there may be other youth coalitions in any particular country which you need to broadly look at and try to leverage these groupings where possible. Have a stronger message coming from all the coalitions of the youth, and that is always helpful. You can also make sure that in the process of your advocacy, you continuously are adapting to the situations based on the discussions as they go on. So this means that you must keep a good eye on the process of the negotiations as they go on, because once you have your strategy well laid out, then you know exactly how to adapt when you see things changing on the negotiations table. So I think this is a nutshell of how it would work in terms of doing that analysis to be able to reach your position. And this pretty much cuts across any kind of decision that you're pushing, whether it's during like you're pushing for a decision to be taken at the AMCEN or the HLPF or UNIA. And in terms of the approaches that you're able to use at the national level, I think most of the national focal points of the CBD are quite open. If you're able to arrange for face-to-face meetings where you can have long and extended discussions on these issues, this is the best. But remember that you have to do your work so well, so that when you have a first meeting, it will be easy to get a second meeting. And what do I mean? I think you need to really prepare for the meeting so that you've got your facts, you've got your arguments very well done, and so that you're able to argue, you're able to respond to the inquiries when they are posed by the national focal point, because it's a discussion, it's a two-way discussion that helps the focal points to understand the issues that you're trying to put on their table for their consideration. And that can only happen if you've done your homework very well and you know exactly what you want to present. You've also got national mechanisms such as national committees that are set up to prepare for these meetings of the conventions or meetings of UNIA, for instance. You have an opportunity to, once you've proven your worth by proven your credibility, you're credible, you'll find that you're continuously getting invitations to these committees whenever they're being organized. And so you can use that as an opportunity to present your issues to a wider range of stakeholders at the national level. Remember, when you're talking to the national focal points, they may buy your idea, but you may also need buy-in from a larger section. For instance, if you need your idea to be bought in by other ministries that are important for that decision, the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Finance, Ministries of Infrastructure, then you also need to be able to push that, articulate that idea and have a discussion going on about it. There are many consultations workshops that are multi-stakeholder organized by parties ahead of these meetings. Those are also quite important opportunities for you, because mostly they form the process of reaching decisions by parties. I did talk about the consultations and the peer review. When this happen at national level, it's also an additional opportunity, because sometimes the process of parties giving their input to these peer reviews or other at the global level can also involve a process of seeking views from concerned stakeholders at the national level. And also you could work with other NGOs and other stakeholders where the priorities intersect. I think I can stop there for now and just say that at the global level, there are also many other opportunities, particularly during the high-level political segments. I just provided photos there which are self-explanatory. Some of you already know what happened in those instances, but these ones are quite important because further to the voice that you've lent to the national level focal point. Sometimes the high-level political decision-making also needs to be convinced. And if you get an opportunity to make your pitch at these high-level segments, for instance, of the COP or other meetings, then that's also an additional appeal that you make to world leaders, and this could actually be very useful to shift their attention. And when you have political buy-in at a high level, the chances of seeing these spread through the negotiations is also much higher. So I'd like to stop there. I'm very happy to address any questions that you have for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Innocent, for clearly explaining how young people can participate in MEAs. And this is not just related to the CBD, but to other agreements as well.